Everyone laughed at the black lady in the restaurant, until the mob boss stood up and said this. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In a bustling, upscale restaurant in downtown New York, the air was thick with the sound of clinking silverware and murmurs of conversation. The atmosphere was elegant, a sharp contrast to the discomfort brewing at table 7. At the center of it all was a black lady, dressed in the humble uniform of a waitress, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the table. The guests, a group of well-dressed individuals, barely glanced up as she served their drinks and placed their meals in front of them. But the moment she did, the comments started. A man in a tailored suit, with an arrogant smirk on his face, leaned back in his chair and looked her up and down with a sneer. "I can't believe someone like her is serving us tonight," he muttered, loud enough for the entire table to hear. The others chuckled, and the laughter was like a knife to her chest. She tried her best to ignore them, her heart racing as she walked away, but it didn't stop. The insults continued to fly. "I bet she's just here to make some quick cash," one woman remarked. Another chimed in. "You'd think they would at least hire someone with a little more class." The words stung, but she kept her head down, focusing on the task at hand. As she moved to the kitchen, her mind raced. This wasn't the first time she'd been treated this way, but something about this moment felt different. She felt like a ghost in the room, invisible and powerless, her dignity slowly slipping away with each passing second. But little did she know, tonight would not end as any of them expected. At the back of the restaurant, just beyond the kitchen's swinging doors, a tall, imposing figure had quietly entered the establishment. The mafia boss, known for his ruthlessness and power, had arrived. He was used to being the center of attention wherever he went, but tonight, his gaze was locked on the interactions at table 7. He had been watching, carefully observing the way the lady was being treated by the guests, and something about it didn't sit right with him. He could hear the laughter, the mocking tones, and the way they belittled her, and he could feel the anger rising in his chest. No one, especially not someone working hard to survive, deserved that kind of treatment. His mind raced, and he took a slow, deliberate step forward. The room seemed to pause in his presence, as if the very air had shifted. With one hand tucked in his jacket pocket and the other resting casually at his side, he made his way toward table 7. The laughter and whispers died down almost immediately as he approached. The group at the table stilled, a subtle tension filling the air. The mafia boss stopped in front of them, his cold eyes scanning the group with a look of disdain. Without a word, he raised a hand and gestured for the lady to come over. "Come here," he said, his voice low and commanding. The waitress hesitated, her eyes wide with surprise, but she walked toward him. As she approached, the restaurant's atmosphere seemed to shift again, this time charged with a strange energy. The boss's gaze never left her, and for the first time that evening, she felt seen, not as a servant, but as someone worthy of respect. "I don't tolerate disrespect in my establishment," he said slowly, his voice echoing with a quiet power that sent a chill through the room. "What you've said about her," he turned his eyes toward the guests, "is beneath me. I will not allow it." There was a moment of silence, thick with disbelief. The guests exchanged uncertain glances, realizing they had crossed a line they hadn't known existed. The tension was palpable, and no one moved. The mafia boss finally turned back to the lady. "You come with me. I'll make sure you're treated the way you deserve." As he spoke, the others at the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their arrogance quickly fading. The black lady blinked in disbelief, still trying to process the sudden shift in her circumstances. "But," she nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she followed him out of the room, leaving the group at the table in stunned silence. That night, something changed, not just for her, but for everyone who witnessed the moment. It was a small act of kindness, but it had the power to change everything. "I still can't believe it," she thought, as she followed the mob boss through the back door of the restaurant. Her mind was still reeling from the sudden shift in her reality. Just moments ago, she was a simple waitress, doing her job while enduring the mockery of the wealthy guests. Now, she was walking with a man who commanded attention with every step he took. She had heard stories about him, the mafia boss who controlled more than just this neighborhood, but never did she think she would be on the receiving end of his attention. The feeling of his gaze, sharp and powerful, was overwhelming. She tried to steady her breath as they walked down the narrow hallway, his bodyguards trailing just behind them, their footsteps silent but constant. When they reached the back door, the boss turned to her, his eyes softening ever so slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, his deep voice carrying an unexpected warmth. She nodded, though she felt the weight of his question settle heavily on her chest. "I've never been treated like that before," she said, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. The boss gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "You don't deserve that kind of treatment. No one does." He paused for a moment before adding, "Let's get you out of here." The door opened, and they stepped out into the cool night air. The restaurant's lights flickered behind them, a stark contrast to the quiet of the alley they now stood in. The boss's bodyguards stood at attention, but there was a strange calm in the air. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace, though it was mixed with confusion. She had been dismissed by so many people throughout her life, but this was different. The boss didn't look at her with disdain. He didn't treat her like she was invisible. She wasn't sure what to make of it. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, glancing up at him. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "I saw what happened. In there. You didn't deserve it." The words hung in the air between them. He wasn't asking for gratitude, but she felt a flicker of something inside her, a spark of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had always kept her head down, accepted the injustices, but now she was being seen for the first time. The thought both terrified and relieved her. "What now?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. The boss took a deep breath, his gaze hardening as he looked around the alley. "Now, we make sure you're taken care of. You've done enough for tonight." He paused, his voice low. "I don't let people like you get treated like that. Not on my watch." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. In her years of working in the service industry, she had been treated like a ghost, never seen, never heard. But this man, this mafia boss, was different. He saw her. "Why me?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I don't like bullies," he said simply. His eyes softened as he added, "And I don't like seeing good people get stomped on." For a moment, they stood there in the cool night air, the weight of the evening pressing down on both of them. She had never expected anything like this in her life, let alone from a man like him. She had heard rumors, of course, the whispers about the mafia boss who controlled everything from the shadows, but she never imagined she would be standing here, in his presence, as he spoke to her like she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to find the words. He gave a slight nod. "You don't have to thank me. Just take care of yourself." The boss turned to his bodyguard. "Make sure she's safe. I don't want anyone touching her tonight." His voice was firm, and the bodyguard gave a sharp nod. "Understood, sir." She blinked, trying to process the situation. She wasn't sure what she had expected when she walked out of the restaurant, but this wasn't it. The boss's protection was a strange comfort, but it also filled her with uncertainty. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The boss turned back to her, his eyes hardening once again. "I want you to live your life," he said, "and I want you to stop being invisible. No one should ever make you feel less than you are." His words cut through her like a knife, but in the best way possible. She had been invisible for so long, and now, for the first time, someone saw her, truly saw her. The thought was almost overwhelming. The boss's voice broke through her thoughts. "We'll get you to a safe place. After tonight, no one will treat you like that again." She nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. I still couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me, even as the cool night air hit my face. It was almost as if the moment we stepped out of that restaurant, the weight of everything that had happened fell onto my shoulders. I had just been humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, but now, standing outside with the mob boss, everything had changed. The power of his presence was undeniable. I had heard the stories about him. The man who controlled everything in his path, whose influence stretched across the city, but I never imagined I'd be standing here, under his protection. I tried to gather my thoughts, but it felt like I was still in shock. The restaurant, the laughter, the mockery, it all seemed so far away now. Yet, the humiliation still lingered, a bitter reminder of how easily people could tear you down. The boss turned to me, his face softening just a little, though his usual intensity remained. "We'll take care of this," he said, his voice steady. "You're not going back to that place." I didn't respond at first, unsure of what to say. "I just want to thank you." I finally managed, my voice quiet. He nodded once, as if to say it wasn't necessary, but then he spoke again. "You don't owe me anything. What happened in there? No one should ever treat you that way." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. "I don't know what to do now," I admitted. "You don't have to do anything. You're not going back to that restaurant." The boss's words were firm, and his eyes held a promise that felt both comforting and intimidating at the same time. "I want to make sure no one ever treats you like that again." The truth of his words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in my life, I was being seen. Not as an invisible worker, not as someone to be mocked or ignored, but as someone who mattered. It was a strange, almost overwhelming feeling. I had spent so many years just trying to survive, blending into the background, that I forgot what it was like to have someone stand up for me. He turned away and gestured for me to follow him. As we walked toward the car waiting in the alley, I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into a completely different world. The sleek black car was a far cry from the beat-up old sedan I drove to work every day. The bodyguard opened the door for me, and I slid into the seat, my hands shaking slightly. The boss followed, sitting across from me, his bodyguard settling into the seat next to him. The car's engine roared to life, and we pulled out into the night. The streetlights passed in a blur as we drove in silence. I wasn't sure what to say, and the boss seemed content to let the silence stretch between us. For a moment, I was too lost in my own thoughts to notice where we were going. When I did look up, I saw that we were heading toward a part of the city I didn't recognize. The buildings grew taller, more imposing. Everything felt more controlled. We turned down a narrow street, and the car slowed as we approached a gated entrance. The gate opened with a smooth, silent motion, and we drove in. The mansion loomed ahead, its lights casting a golden glow on the dark night. "This is where you'll be staying," the boss said, his voice cutting through the quiet. I blinked in surprise. "What?" I asked, my mind struggling to process what he had just said. "You're not going back to that apartment. You'll stay here." He motioned toward the mansion in front of us. My heart skipped a beat as the car came to a stop. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The mansion was massive, and I knew I couldn't possibly belong here. I started to say, but he cut me off. "You need to be somewhere safe. This is the safest place I can offer you." There was no arguing with him. He opened the door, and the bodyguard stepped out first, then he followed. I hesitated for a moment, my mind still reeling from the events of the night. But as I looked at the mansion, I realized that I didn't have a choice. This was my reality now. "Come on," the boss said, his tone softer now, almost encouraging. "Let's get you settled." As I stepped out of the car, the cool night air felt different. It didn't feel like the weight of the world was pressing down on me anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The boss led me into the mansion, his steps confident, and I followed. The walls inside were lined with artwork, and the floors were polished to a mirror shine. I couldn't help but feel out of place, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the sense of security that surrounded me. He showed me to a guest room, where the bed was made up with crisp white sheets. "Rest for now," he said, his voice gentle. "You'll need it." I nodded, too stunned to say anything else. As he left the room, the door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. The events of the night felt like they belonged to someone else's life, not mine. But here I was, in a place I had never imagined, with the protection of a man whose reputation was both feared and respected. I lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing. What would tomorrow bring? How would my life change from this point on? I didn't have the answers, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I woke up to the soft rays of sunlight filtering through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. The silence of the mansion was a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. I had spent hours tossing and turning in that massive bed, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The mockery, the boss's intervention, the sudden turn of events, it was all too much to process. Yet, somehow, I felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance to breathe. I sat up, my feet touching the cold marble floor, and rubbed my eyes. The events of the night seemed like a distant dream, but the room around me, the lavish furniture, the gleaming surfaces, reminded me that it was real. I couldn't help but feel out of place in such a grand setting. I had always lived modestly, scraping by, and now I was surrounded by luxury I had never imagined. I stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the sprawling estate. The grounds were perfectly manicured, and the view of the city in the distance was breathtaking. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, I had been humiliated in a restaurant, laughed at by people I would never have associated with if not for my job. And now, here I was, in the home of one of the most powerful men in the city, the man who had defended me when no one else would. The thought brought a strange warmth to my chest. Just then, there was a knock on the door. I turned to see one of the bodyguards standing in the doorway, his face unreadable as always. "The boss would like to see you," he said, his voice calm. My heart skipped a beat at the mention of the boss. I had hardly seen him since we left the restaurant, and now, the thought of facing him again stirred a mixture of gratitude and confusion. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. "I'll be right there," I replied. The bodyguard gave a small nod and stepped away. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door. As I made my way through the grand hallway, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What did he want? Was this just an act of kindness, or was there something more to it? I had no answers, and that uncertainty weighed heavily on me. The mansion was eerily quiet, and as I approached the study, I felt a knot form in my stomach. When I entered, the boss was sitting behind a large mahogany desk, his usual stoic expression on his face. He looked up as I walked in, and his eyes softened slightly, though his demeanor remained as composed as ever. "Come in," he said, his voice low but welcoming. I stepped forward, my shoes clicking on the polished floor. "Have a seat," he said, motioning to the chair in front of the desk. I sat down, trying to maintain my composure. The silence between us was thick, and I wondered if he was waiting for me to speak first. "Thank you," I said, finally breaking the quiet, "for what you did last night. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." The boss studied me for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "No one should be treated like that." His words hit me harder than I expected. It was simple, but the sincerity in his tone made me feel like I was more than just a servant to be ignored. He leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping the edge of the desk as he spoke again. "I've been thinking about your situation. I don't want you to go back to that life." The word startled me. "What do you mean?" I asked, unsure of where he was going with this. He paused before answering. "You've been working in that restaurant for too long. It's not right. I've arranged for you to have a different job, something more fitting for someone of your potential." My mind raced. "A new job?" I repeated, confused. "What kind of job?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp. "I have a number of businesses. I can make sure you're taken care of, that you're given the opportunity to do more than just serve people who look down on you." His offer was both a relief and a source of uncertainty. I had always been independent, and the thought of working for someone in his world, the world of the mafia, was overwhelming. But at the same time, I couldn't deny the appeal of a life where I wasn't constantly struggling to survive. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. The boss gave a small nod, his expression softening. "You don't have to decide now, but think about it. I want you to have a choice." I stared at him for a moment, processing his words. I had never been offered something like this before, an opportunity to escape the cycle of poverty and humiliation. But I also knew that accepting his offer meant stepping into a world I knew nothing about, a world where I might lose myself. The boss didn't press me further. Instead, he stood up and walked around the desk, his eyes never leaving mine. "Take your time," he said. "And remember, no matter what you decide, you're not alone." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I was caught between the life I knew and the life that was being offered to me, a life of safety, security, and perhaps even something more. I didn't know what to do, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had options. I spent the next few days in a haze, my mind constantly going back to the conversation I had with the boss. The idea of leaving everything behind, of stepping into a new world where I was no longer invisible, was both thrilling and terrifying. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go of the life I had known, even if it meant never having to struggle again. It was a hard decision, one that kept me awake at night, turning over the possibilities, imagining what my future might look like. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't go back to the way things were. The humiliation I had faced at the restaurant, the constant feeling of being looked down upon, it was something I couldn't live with anymore. It wasn't just about the job, it was about how I was treated, how I had been made to feel less than human. That night, I found myself sitting on the edge of the luxurious bed, staring out at the city lights. The mansion was silent, but the thoughts in my head were anything but. What would my life look like if I took the boss's offer? What would it be like to work for someone like him, in his world? The idea was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. I hadn't felt this way in a long time. The boss had shown me a kindness I didn't expect, and for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. I wasn't just a faceless worker in the background. I wasn't invisible. The sound of footsteps outside the door brought me out of my thoughts. I turned to see the boss standing there, his tall frame blocking the doorway. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me with that same intense gaze. "Have you thought about it?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something softer in it now. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I've been thinking about it." He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. And he pressed. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. This was it. The decision I had to make. "I'm ready," I said, the words coming out before I could second-guess myself. His expression softened, though there was still that hint of seriousness in his eyes. "Good," he said simply. "You're making the right choice." I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. There was no turning back now, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking toward something better, something I could control. He stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder in a rare gesture of reassurance. "I'm going to make sure everything changes for you," he said. "You won't have to go back to that life." His words, so simple yet full of promise, gave me the strength I needed to move forward. For so long, I had been stuck in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. But now, with his support, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't just about escaping the restaurant. It was about taking control of my own future. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. The boss gave me a nod, his gaze intense, but there was a flicker of something more in his eyes now, something that made me believe that, despite his world of power and control, he genuinely wanted to help me. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice low. "You've earned it. No one should have to live in fear." As he turned to leave, he stopped at the door and looked back at me. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll start making the changes you need." I nodded, and as the door closed behind him, I sat there for a moment, processing everything. I had made my decision. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter, one where I no longer had to hide in the shadows. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. It wasn't just the prospect of a new job or a new life. It was the knowledge that I was finally in control of my own destiny. And no one, not even the most powerful people in the world, could take that away from me. I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow through the curtains. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and took a deep breath. The past few days had felt like a whirlwind, and yet here I was, in this grand mansion, still processing everything that had happened. The decision I made the night before weighed heavily on me, but there was something else too. Something I couldn't quite shake. It was the feeling that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just trying to survive. I was finally living. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lush garden that stretched out before me. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. Just days ago, I was invisible, working tirelessly in that restaurant, enduring ridicule, but now, I had a future, or at least a chance at one. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see the same bodyguard standing in the doorway, his expression neutral as always. "The boss wants to see you," he said, his tone even. I nodded, my heart racing slightly at the thought of seeing him again. It had only been a few hours since we last spoke, but the weight of his words, the promise of a new life, still lingered in my mind. I followed the bodyguard down the long hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silent mansion. As we approached the study, I could feel the anticipation building in my chest. I wasn't sure what to expect when I entered. The boss had made it clear that he wanted to help me, but what did that really mean? I had no idea, and part of me was still unsure about stepping into his world. I took a deep breath and stepped into the study. The boss was sitting at his desk, looking over some papers, his back to me. When he heard the door close, he looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Come in. We have things to discuss." I stepped forward and sat down across from him, my hands resting on my lap as I tried to steady my nerves. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his gaze softening just slightly. I looked up at him, surprised by the genuine concern in his eyes. I'm still processing everything," I admitted. "This is a lot to take in." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This is a big change, but it's a change for the better." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," I finally said. About working for you, about leaving that life behind." The boss studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were reading me. "And?" he asked. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. I think I'm ready for this," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves swirling in my chest. "I don't want to go back to the way things were." A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "You don't belong in that kind of environment. I won't let you go back." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "I'm offering you more than just a job. I'm offering you a chance at a new life, a life where you don't have to settle for less. You'll have security, respect, and a future you can control." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. I was in control of my own future. "I know it's a lot to take in," he continued, "but I want you to understand that you have options now. You don't have to go back to that life, that job. You're worth more than that." I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at him. This man, this mafia boss, had given me something I had never thought possible, a chance at a life where I didn't have to fight for every breath. "Thank you," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. He gave me a small nod, his expression softening. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "This is just the beginning." He stood up and walked over to the window, his back to me. "I've already set things in motion. You won't have to worry about that restaurant anymore. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I stood up too, my mind still spinning. What do I do now?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He turned back to me, his eyes locking onto mine. "Now, you start your new life," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "And I'll be here to make sure nothing gets in your way." I felt a sense of calm wash over me as I looked at him. For the first time in years, I felt like I had someone on my side, someone who truly cared about what happened to me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. The boss gave me a small smile. "Rest up," he said. "Tomorrow will be a new day, and with it, a new beginning." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had made the right choice. And now, it was time to move forward. I spent the next few days adjusting to this new life, though every morning when I woke up, I couldn't shake the disbelief that had settled deep inside me. I had gone from being a simple waitress, treated like I was invisible, to being in the protection of one of the most powerful men in the city. The mansion, with its towering gates and grand marble pillars, felt like a world I could never have imagined stepping into. Yet here I was, with everything I needed and nothing but questions swirling in my mind. How would I fit into this new life? What would it really mean to work for him? And most importantly, what did he want from me? These thoughts consumed me as I moved through each day. The boss, Dominic Valentino, as I had learned his full name, had kept his promise. He made sure I didn't have to return to that restaurant. But now that I was free from that toxic environment, the weight of what came next felt heavier than ever. Every time I thought about the future, it was like stepping into the unknown. One evening, after I had spent the day getting used to my new surroundings, Dominic called me into his study. It was the room where he conducted all of his business, filled with dark leather chairs and rich wood shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. As I entered, he was sitting at the large mahogany desk, his attention on the papers in front of him. He looked up as I walked in, offering me a small smile. "Come in. Take a seat," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. I sat down, trying to appear calm, though my heart was racing. I had no idea what he wanted now, but I knew I wasn't in a position to question him. "How are you adjusting?" he asked, his voice casual, but with that ever-present authority. "It's a lot to take in," I admitted, looking around the room. "But I'm getting there." "Good." He nodded, leaning back in his chair. "I want to make sure you're comfortable, but I also want you to start preparing for what comes next." I furrowed my brow, uncertain. "What do you mean?" I asked. He gave me a measured look, his gaze softening just slightly. "I want you to work for me. Not as a waitress, not as someone just trying to make it through the day. I need someone with your skills. Someone who understands the value of loyalty." His words caught me off guard. "What do you mean by loyalty?" I asked, feeling a bit exposed under his intense stare. He paused, his eyes never leaving mine. "Loyalty means more than just showing up for work. It means understanding what's at stake and doing what it takes to protect what matters. What matters, right now, is our organization." I had heard whispers about the Valentino family, about how they controlled everything from the shadows. But hearing it from Dominic himself made it all too real. The mob. It wasn't a life I had ever imagined for myself, but the idea of working alongside Dominic in this capacity seemed like a chance I couldn't pass up. "I don't know if I'm cut out for that kind of life," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "You don't need to know everything right now," he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. "I'll teach you what you need to know. You'll learn the ropes as you go. What matters is that you have the right mindset. You want to make a difference." "I can see that." I stared at him, the weight of his words settling in. Could I really be part of this world? A world of power, danger, and loyalty that stretched beyond anything I had ever known. Dominic leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "I don't just need someone to work for me. I need someone I can trust. Someone who has been through hard things and still stands strong. I need you to be that person." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I had spent so many years fighting to survive on my own, never relying on anyone. And now, here I was, being asked to join a world I didn't fully understand, to trust someone who, just days ago, was nothing more than a distant figure to me. "What will I be doing?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "At first, you'll help manage some of the less risky parts of our operations," he explained. "You'll learn how we handle things, how we protect what's ours. It won't be easy, but I promise you, it'll be worth it." I nodded, still processing the enormity of his words. "I'll do it," I said, though I didn't know what it truly meant. Dominic gave me a small smile, nodding. "Good. I knew you would." With that, he stood up and walked over to the door, opening it for me. "We'll get started tomorrow. Get some rest tonight." As I walked out of the study, I felt a strange sense of resolve building inside me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when my life truly began to change. I didn't know where this new path would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let fear hold me back anymore. Dominic's trust meant something. It meant that, for the first time in my life, I had someone who believed in me. And that was enough to make me believe in myself. I woke up to a new day, but everything about it felt different. The weight of Dominic's words from the night before still echoed in my mind. I was no longer just a waitress trying to survive. I was part of something far bigger now. The life he had promised me, the protection he had given me, had pulled me from the shadows and thrust me into a world I had never known. I had always wondered what it would be like to be seen, to be valued, and now I was living that reality. But with it came a heavy responsibility, one I wasn't entirely sure I was prepared for. The room I woke up in was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. I had spent the night trying to sleep, but my mind kept racing, replaying everything that had happened. The way the boss had looked at me when he said he needed someone he could trust, someone who had been through hard things and stood strong. I had been through plenty of hard things. Was I really the right person for what he needed? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to back down now. I had made a choice to take control of my life. The door to my room opened softly, and I looked up to see one of Dominic's bodyguards standing there. "The boss wants to see you," he said, his expression neutral, as always. I nodded, my heart beating a little faster at the thought of what the day would bring. I had no idea what kind of task I would be given, but the anticipation made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I followed the bodyguard down the grand hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The mansion was quiet, but the silence was filled with the unspoken weight of everything that had changed. I had always been invisible, unnoticed by those around me. But now, every moment felt like it was being observed, scrutinized, as though every action had a consequence. As we entered the study, Dominic was already there, sitting at the desk with papers scattered before him. His sharp eyes met mine as I stepped inside, and he motioned for me to sit across from him. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "How are you feeling today?" I hesitated, still unsure how to answer. How was I supposed to feel? I was living in a mansion, protected by one of the most powerful men in the city, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something dangerous. "I'm adjusting," I said slowly. "But I'm ready." Dominic nodded, as if he had been expecting that answer. "Good. That's what I like to hear." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a focused intensity. "I have a job for you today. A small task to start, but it will help you get familiar with how things work around here." My stomach twisted with nerves, but I nodded. "What do you need me to do?" He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "I need you to meet with a few of my associates today. We have some business that needs to be handled, and I want to see how you handle it." My heart skipped a beat. "Business?" I repeated. "What kind of business?" Dominic's expression didn't change, but his tone became more serious. "We deal with a lot of things here. Things that require discretion, intelligence, and loyalty. I need someone I can trust to handle these situations, someone who isn't afraid to step up when the time comes." I swallowed hard. Was this what I had signed up for? This world was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. But as I looked at Dominic, I realized something. He wasn't just offering me a job. He was offering me a place in his world, a chance to prove that I could stand beside him, not just as a worker, but as someone he could rely on. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my chest. He gave me a slight nod. "Good. I'll have one of my people pick you up later. They'll take you to the meeting. You'll observe, listen, and learn." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "And remember, this is just the beginning. I need to see how you handle yourself. If you prove yourself worthy, there will be more for you to do. Bigger things. Things that matter." I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The pressure was on now, but I wasn't going to back down. This was my chance. I had fought my whole life to get to this point, and I wasn't about to let fear hold me back. As I left the study, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my destiny. This was my opportunity to make something of myself, to prove that I was more than just a victim of circumstance. As I prepared for the meeting, I couldn't help but wonder what the day would bring. Would I be able to handle it? Would I be able to earn Dominic's trust? I didn't know, but I was ready to find out. I arrived at the meeting spot, a sleek black car waiting for me just outside the mansion gates. The driver, a tall man with a no-nonsense expression, opened the door for me and nodded as I stepped inside. I didn't say a word. The tension in my chest was building with each passing second. I had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear. Today was going to test me. The car sped through the streets of the city, passing by tall skyscrapers and the busy hustle of everyday life. Everything felt surreal. Just days ago, I was working in a restaurant, fighting for every dollar, doing everything I could just to stay afloat. Now, I was about to step into a world I didn't understand, Dominic's world. The car eventually slowed as we turned into an industrial area, a stark contrast to the polished streets I was used to. The vehicle stopped in front of a nondescript building, its windows dark and uninviting. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped out, the cold air hitting me sharply. The driver didn't say a word, simply gesturing toward the entrance. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The building was dimly lit, with a long hallway that stretched ahead of me. At the end of the hall, a door opened, revealing a group of men sitting around a table. I couldn't make out all their faces, but the air was thick with authority. Dominic was already there, sitting at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room. He looked up as I entered, his gaze piercing but not unwelcoming. "You're late," he said calmly, though there was no anger in his voice. It wasn't a criticism, it was just a statement. "Sorry," I muttered, my voice betraying my nerves. I moved to the empty seat beside him, trying to keep my composure. "This is the team I work with," Dominic continued, gesturing to the men around the table. "They're the ones who handle most of the business." The men nodded, acknowledging me, but I could tell they weren't sure what to make of me. I was the outsider here, the one who didn't belong in their world. They probably assumed I was just another one of Dominic's many assistants, someone who didn't have to prove herself. But today, I was determined to show them I wasn't just a passive player in their game. "We have some things to discuss," Dominic said, his voice steady. "There's a shipment coming in tonight. It's crucial that everything goes smoothly." I straightened in my chair, focusing on the conversation. The men began to speak, throwing around terms I didn't fully understand. It was clear they were discussing something illegal, smuggling, extortion, or something worse. But none of it mattered. What mattered was that I was here, learning, listening, absorbing every word. Dominic glanced at me as I sat there, silent but alert. He must have seen something in me, something that said I wasn't just here to watch, because after a few minutes, he turned to one of his men. "Let's give her a chance," he said. The man, a large figure with a scar running down his cheek, shot me a glance before standing up. "Follow me," he muttered, his voice rough. I stood up and followed him down a narrow corridor that led to a small office in the back. The door closed behind us with a soft click. "This is where you come in," the man said, pointing to a computer on the desk. "You're going to help us with the logistics. We need someone who can keep track of everything, make sure the shipment gets where it's supposed to go, and that no one gets caught." My heart raced. I had never done anything like this before. But I had come this far. I wasn't going to back down now. "I can do that," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves coursing through me. He raised an eyebrow, clearly testing me. "Are you sure? You've got no experience in this kind of work. You really want to dive in head first?" I met his gaze, determined. "I want to prove myself," I said simply. "I want to show that I can handle this." He nodded slowly, studying me for a long moment. "All right," he said, reaching for the keyboard. "Let's see if you can handle it." I stepped forward, looking at the screen in front of me. The details on the screen were confusing at first, coordinates, names, codes, but I quickly adjusted, focusing on the task at hand. The more I looked at it, the more it made sense. The pieces clicked into place. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something important, something that mattered. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was part of something bigger. The man watched me silently as I worked, his arms crossed. Finally, after a few minutes, he spoke. "Not bad," he said. "You might just have a future in this after all." His words felt like a small victory, but I didn't let myself get distracted. This was only the beginning. "I'll finish up the rest," I said, looking up from the screen. He nodded and walked out, leaving me alone in the small office. I took a deep breath and leaned back in the chair. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. I was part of something, and I was finally taking charge of my own destiny. I spent the next few days working closely with Dominic's team, getting to know the ins and outs of the operations. At first, I felt like an outsider, unsure of my place in this dangerous world I had stepped into. But as time passed, I realized I was being trusted more than I had ever been before. I had proven myself during the meeting, and now, I was handling logistics and communications for the shipments that came through. It wasn't glamorous, but it was important. And that was enough. Every day brought a new challenge, but also a new sense of purpose. As I worked, I started to notice the subtle shift in the way people treated me. No longer was I just the woman in the background. I had a seat at the table now. I was trusted, and that trust carried weight. One evening, after a particularly intense day, Dominic asked me to meet him in his study. I had gotten used to the routine by now, but there was something about the way he had called for me that made my stomach flip. I knew this wasn't just another task. As I walked into the study, I could feel the tension in the air. Dominic was standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. The room felt heavier than usual, like something big was about to happen. "Come in," he said, not turning around. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that I hadn't heard before. I stepped forward and stood next to him, trying not to show how nervous I was. He finally looked at me, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "You've been doing well," he said, his voice steady. "I'm impressed by your work so far." I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral, but I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet. He held my gaze for a moment longer before speaking again. "But I need to know something," he said. "Are you ready to take the next step?" The words hit me like a ton of bricks. The next step? I had been working hard, but what did he mean? My mind raced, trying to make sense of his question. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned away from the window and walked toward his desk, his steps measured and purposeful. "You've seen how we operate. You've learned how things work here," he said. "I need someone who can handle more than just the logistics. I need someone who can help lead." I felt a lump form in my throat. Lead? Me? I had never considered myself a leader. But I also knew I wasn't the same person I had been a few weeks ago. I had grown in ways I hadn't expected, and I was beginning to understand the weight of the responsibility that came with Dominic's world. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. He turned back to face me, his expression unreadable. "I don't need you to be ready," he said. "I need you to want it. You've proven you can handle what's been thrown at you so far. This is the next step. It's not going to be easy, but if you want to prove yourself, this is how you do it." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Everything inside me was screaming to run, to go back to what I knew, to stay in the safe, familiar space I had created for myself. But then I remembered everything I had been through, the long hours, the ridicule, the constant struggle to be seen. I had fought so hard to get here. I couldn't back down now. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice stronger than before. Dominic's lips curved into a slight smile. "I need you to work directly with me," he said. "You'll help manage operations, make decisions, and oversee certain parts of the business. But it won't be easy. You'll be dealing with people who don't trust easily. You'll have to earn their respect." My heart raced at the thought, but I didn't hesitate. This was it, the moment that could change everything for me. "I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with how confident I sounded. Dominic's smile widened, just slightly. "I knew you would be." He moved around the desk and placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "From this point on, you're with me. No more hiding in the shadows. You're in this world now, whether you like it or not." The weight of his words sank in. I wasn't just a part of his team anymore. I was stepping into his world fully. There was no going back now. "I won't let you down," I said, my voice steady. He nodded, his expression serious. "I know you won't. But remember, once you're in, there's no turning back. You'll be expected to make tough choices. People will try to test you. Stay focused. And remember who you're doing this for." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This was the moment I had been working toward, the moment when everything would change. "I understand," I said. Dominic gave me a final nod before turning back to his desk. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow, we start the next chapter." As I left the study, I felt the weight of his words settle on me. This was no longer just about survival. It was about power. It was about making my mark in a world where I had once been invisible. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I was ready to face it head on. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. The weight of Dominic's words from last night lingered in my mind. Today, I would step fully into the world I had only just begun to understand. As I got dressed and prepared myself, the reality of what was about to unfold began to settle in. This wasn't just about running errands or doing menial tasks anymore. I had been entrusted with something far greater, something that could change my life forever. As I walked down the grand hallway of the mansion, I couldn't help but feel the pressure building. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a weight I feared. It was a weight I embraced. I had made the decision to rise, and now I had to prove it. The moment I stepped outside, I was greeted by one of Dominic's men, a quiet but imposing figure. He nodded at me, signaling that it was time. I didn't speak, but the determination in my eyes was clear. We drove in silence through the streets of the city, the hum of the engine the only sound between us. The car pulled up to a building I hadn't seen before, its exterior unremarkable, yet something about it made my heart skip a beat. As we entered, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Men in suits moved with purpose, their eyes sharp, assessing everything and everyone. This was the first time I truly felt the weight of the world I was about to step into. The man who had accompanied me led me into a back room, where Dominic was already waiting, his expression as intense as ever. He didn't waste any time. You're here because I believe in you, he said, his voice calm but full of authority. Today, you'll be taking the lead on something important. You've earned my trust, and now it's time to show me what you can do. My pulse quickened, but I nodded, determined to prove that I belonged. What do I need to do? I asked, my voice steady despite the nerves that twisted in my stomach. Dominic looked at me for a long moment, his eyes never leaving mine. There's a deal going down today. It's critical that everything goes smoothly. You'll need to keep an eye on every detail, make sure there are no mistakes. The people involved. He paused, glancing at the men around the room. They won't respect you unless you show them you're in charge. You have to lead them. Make sure everything goes according to plan. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was no small task. The stakes were higher than anything I had ever been involved in before. I understand, I said, my voice more confident now. Dominic nodded, satisfied. Good. Remember, you're not just working for me today. You're working for yourself. The choices you make here will determine how far you go. With that, he turned and walked toward the door. I followed, trying to keep my focus. As we entered the main room, I was met with the eyes of the men waiting there. They looked at me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. This was the moment I had been preparing for, and I knew I couldn't afford to falter. Dominic spoke to them first, introducing me as his right-hand person for the day. The men didn't speak, but their eyes said everything. They were sizing me up, judging whether I had what it took to be part of this world. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling the weight of their gazes on me. We're here to make this deal work, I said, my voice clear and strong. If any of you have questions, ask now. I won't tolerate mistakes. I could feel the tension in the room, but I wasn't backing down. The men exchanged glances, but none of them spoke. I could tell they were waiting for me to make the first move. This was my moment to prove myself, to show them that I was not just some outsider, but someone who could command respect. We went over the details of the deal, and as I listened, I began to realize how much power I held in that room. The men listened to me, nodded at my instructions, and followed my lead. With every decision, every command I gave, I felt the weight of responsibility settle in. But strangely, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the first real sense of control I had ever had in my life. As the meeting ended, Dominic looked at me with a small, approving nod. You did well, he said. You showed them what you're made of. I felt a rush of pride, but I didn't let it show. This was just the beginning. I still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I left the building, the reality of what I had accomplished started to sink in. I had made a mark in a world where I once felt invisible. But now, I was part of something bigger than myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone push me back into the shadows. I woke up the next morning feeling different, more alive than I had in a long time. The weight of yesterday's success was still on my mind, but it was no longer a burden. It was a sign that I had truly stepped into the life I had always wanted. The shift was subtle, but it was there. Every task I had done yesterday, every decision I made, had solidified my place within Dominic's world. And that world was unlike anything I had ever imagined. The mansion I had woken up and felt like it was both a sanctuary and a reminder of what I had left behind. I still had a long way to go, but something inside me clicked. I wasn't just working for Dominic anymore. I was becoming part of his empire, and I wasn't going to let that go without a fight. As I sat up in the bed, I took a moment to reflect on how far I had come in such a short amount of time. Just weeks ago, I was struggling, trying to survive in a world that didn't care about people like me. Now, I had power, influence, and more importantly, the respect that I had always craved. I got dressed quickly, the morning light streaming through the curtains. Today was going to be different. I could feel it. When I stepped out into the hallway, I was met by one of Dominic's men, a silent figure who nodded as I passed by. The mansion was quiet, but the silence was different now. It wasn't the emptiness I had felt when I first arrived. It was the calm before a storm, the calm before the next big move. I wasn't sure what today would bring, but I was ready for whatever came my way. I met Dominic in his study as usual. He was already sitting at the desk, his eyes scanning over documents. But when he saw me, he put them down and looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. I trust you're ready for the next step, he said, his voice calm but commanding. Yes, I said without hesitation. I had no doubt now. I was ready. He stood up and walked over to me, his gaze unwavering. Good. We've got a lot to do today, but I need to know something first. I looked at him, wondering what was coming. What's your ultimate goal? He asked, his voice steady. But there was something deeper behind the question. I paused, thinking carefully. It was a simple question, but it felt loaded. To make sure I never have to go back to the life I had before, I said honestly. Dominic studied me for a moment before nodding slowly. That's what I wanted to hear, he said. Because the next step isn't just about following orders. It's about making choices. Big choices. I want to see if you're ready to make them. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. I had been given power, but with that power came responsibility. I am, I said firmly. Dominic gave a small smile, a rare expression that softened his usually hard demeanor. I knew you would be. He motioned for me to follow him, and we walked out of the study, the sound of our footsteps echoing down the grand hallway. We went through the back of the mansion, and I followed him outside to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. He turned to me as we approached the vehicle. We're heading to a meeting with one of our partners, he said. I want you to be there, to observe how things are done, how we negotiate. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was going to be part of the decision-making. The weight of that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Dominic gave a quick nod, and we both got into the car. The ride was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. I kept my eyes focused on the road ahead, the world outside the window moving in a blur. As we neared the meeting spot, I could feel the gravity of the situation intensifying. We pulled up to a nondescript building in the heart of the city. It was a place most people would overlook, but I knew better. This was one of the many fronts the organization used to operate in the shadows. Dominic stepped out of the car first, and I followed closely behind, my heart racing in anticipation. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the tension of business being done. Men in suits sat around a table, their conversations quiet but filled with purpose. The room went silent when Dominic entered, all eyes on him. I stood at the edge of the room, watching as he took his seat at the head of the table. This is the future of our operations, Dominic said, his voice carrying across the room. And I need everyone here to understand that. This isn't just business. This is about power, control, and loyalty. I listened closely, absorbing every word, knowing that today was more than just a meeting. It was my chance to prove I belonged in this world. As the discussions began, I could feel the weight of the decisions being made, the choices that would affect not only the organization but my future. This was the moment where everything would change. No longer would I be the outsider. I was becoming part of the force that controlled everything around me, and I would never let that go. The meeting stretched on, but I wasn't focused on the details anymore. My mind was running a mile a minute, replaying everything that had happened up to this point. Dominic's words echoed in my mind. This was no longer just about following orders. It was about making the decisions that shaped everything. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel the eyes of the men around the table assessing me, trying to figure out if I was truly part of this world or if I would crumble under the pressure. I had spent my whole life trying to be seen, and now, for the first time, I realized that I was not just seen. I was part of something bigger. The choices I made here, today, would affect everything. As the discussions continued, I could feel the weight of the decisions mounting. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about control. Control over the lives of everyone involved. My hands were steady, my mind sharp. I was learning how to negotiate, how to assert myself in a world that had always seemed so far out of reach. As the meeting came to a close, Dominic stood up and nodded toward me. You did well today, he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of approval. You've earned their respect. I felt a rush of pride, but I didn't let it show. This was only the beginning. As we left the building, I couldn't help but feel the shift. The world around me was different now. I wasn't just an observer. I was part of it. Dominic had given me the chance to prove myself, and I had done it. But as we got back into the car, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more decisions, and more tests. But I was ready. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The car ride back to the mansion was quiet, but I could feel the weight of everything that had happened today. The power, the respect, the decisions, it was all starting to make sense. I wasn't just following the path set out for me anymore. I was carving my own. When we arrived back at the mansion, Dominic turned to me before I could get out of the car. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice softer now. "But this is just the beginning. If you're really going to do this, you have to stay focused. Don't let the power or the money blind you to what really matters." I nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. I wasn't here to be part of a system that ran on greed and control. I was here to make a difference, to stand up for what was right. The world I had entered was dangerous, yes, but I had the strength to navigate it. As I walked into the mansion, I felt the weight of my decisions settling in. This was my life now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of it. The path ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had fought my whole life to be seen, to matter, and now, I was more than just seen. I was respected, trusted, and I was here to stay. If you enjoy captivating romance stories with unexpected twists, this narrative will keep you hooked from beginning to end. Follow the journey of a woman who starts from humble beginnings and finds herself thrust into a world of power and danger. As she navigates the complexities of trust, loyalty, and control, she learns what it means to truly step into a life that once seemed out of reach. This series of romance stories isn't just about love, but about personal growth, discovering strength in adversity, and making choices that shape your future. As the protagonist faces challenges and makes pivotal decisions, the stakes rise, showing that true romance goes beyond the surface. With each chapter, the plot intensifies, proving that every romantic moment is intertwined with personal empowerment. If you're looking for romance stories that delve deep into character development and unexpected encounters, this tale delivers everything you want and more. Watch as the main character becomes more than just a participant in her own life. She becomes a force to be reckoned with in a world full of power and intrigue. These romance stories will not only capture your heart, but also make you rethink what it means to truly fight for your future and your place in the world.